Hello everyone, welcome to Psychology 32, Chapter 7, Psychosocial Development. I'm going to go through this chapter fairly quickly because a lot of the material is straightforward. I want to focus on some of the later slides which require a little bit more explanation. Okay, so this is talking about the first emotions and interpersonal interactions that the child develops voluntarily throughout the developmental process. In the beginning, they were just reflexes, right? The sucking reflex, the swallow reflex, right? The gag reflex, we talked about those before. But now we're talking about how the child begins to relate to the outside world. And there are a number of different factors that contribute to how the child relates to the outside world. And we've been talking about each of these theories. And each of these theories has their belief set as to how those emotions, how those interpersonal reactions develop. So we'll go through them one at a time to see if we can make it make a little bit more sense. Okay. First, social or emotional interactions here are going to be, you're going to see pleasure and pain. So the child smiles, giggles, laughs, or shows pain, which is crying. After that, there's curiosity, where they start to notice things and look at things. They tend to get happy when they see familiar faces. That's that social smile. They'll laugh, and they tend to get angry, typically when they're frustrated, when they can't grab something that they want, or you're trying to feed them, and they're not interested in that food, or they're not interested in eating at all. At 9 months, you'll start to see what they call stranger wariness or stranger danger. And they might be a little bit apprehensive when they see new faces. They might ultimately cry, they might hide their own face, they might appear anxious or scared, and this usually goes away by the age of 2. Separation anxiety, which is similar to stranger danger, but it happens when the infant is separated from his or her primary caregiver. They cry, they get upset. Okay, and again, this is normal. This is not a social phobia, this is not an anxiety disorder, it's normal. Okay? All right. New emotions tend to come out toward the end of the second year. You're talking about pride, shame, embarrassment, and guilt, and these are pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go through each one at a time. But what you need to understand from this is that the child's emotional repertoire tends to become more nuanced, more advanced, more adult-like. Again, it still is basic. Their understanding of the world is still very limited. So why they react to certain things happens usually because of something on the surface. The kid is not deeply processing, world ideas here. They might feel proud because they put blocks together the right way and they didn't fall down, and it's not that they're taking this as necessarily a reflection of their overall intellectual ability and their potential to get into Harvard, right? It's just they feel good because they did something that they thought they might not have been able to do, okay? All right, emotions continue to change. Fear is going to decrease, but the frequency of the fear decreases, but it tends to get more severe when it happens. And more focused. They get angry at one thing in particular, right? Whatever that thing is that's bothering them, okay? At the age of about 18 months, you'll start to see what they call self-recognition, understanding that they're an individual in a world of individuals. And they start to hopefully understand that their feelings and thoughts are separate from other people. We call this theory of mind. And it's an important thing because children with developmental disorders, particularly autistic spectrum disorders, tend to really never develop theory of mind, but this is the beginning components of the development of theory of mind. Okay, now, here are the 5 theories that we talked about before: analytic theory, behavioral theory, cognitive, epigenetic, and sociocultural. Each one of these theories has its own belief set, right? Analytic theory talks about unconscious processes and early childhood interactions. Behavioral talks about reinforcements and punishments, etc. And each of these is going to explain emotional development through their own system. Okay? Analytic theory talks for the need for responsive maternal care. If the child takes care and if the parent takes care and interacts with the child is ultimately going to develop, healthy interpersonal relationships. And these healthy interpersonal relationships that start in childhood stay with us for the rest of our lives, according to analytic theory. Behavioral theory talks about reinforcements and punishments and social learning. So basically, when a child smiles at you, you smile back. The child learns, well, that's smiling, and that's what I do. When somebody smiles at me, I smile back. When somebody laughs, I laugh. When I do good things, and I'm using air quotes when I say good, people praise me, pick me up, smile at me, hold me, kiss me, etc. And when I do things that aren't good, I get a punishment. They tell me no, they take that thing away from me. A big part of behaviorism is also social learning. So there's new research, and this is not something you need to know for the test, but it's something that is big in the literature nowadays. There's new research on this thing called mirror neurons. And mirror neurons are these nerves in the brain that basically trigger certain areas of our brain to become active. The reason why we call them mirror neurons is that they trigger the activity in our brains of the same things that we're watching. What I mean by that is, let's say you're watching somebody crying, and let's say that activates a particular area of the brain. Well, when I'm watching somebody crying, these mirror neurons will activate that crying area in my brain. So if I watch somebody crying, and if you were to look at my brain under a brain scan, my brain looks like I'm crying. And it's hard to tell the difference because these mirror neurons activate this. We didn't really know much about mirror neurons before. We don't know that much about them now, but you can understand how these could have a tremendous impact on development because, there was that old phrase, monkey see, monkey do. As a child tends to watch somebody behave in a certain way, they'll start to emulate them or mimic them, actually, not even just emulate them. You wave your hand, they'll wave their hand, right? You smile, they'll smile. And the child, in essence, is learning these behaviors really just through seeing other people do it. And on some level, it's almost automatic, right? It's almost something that the child does without really being able to control, at least in the beginning. And this stays with us for the rest of our lives. There's research to show that, if somebody smiles at you when they approach you, you're going to be more relaxed and happier because it's engaging these mirror neurons. On a basic level, this is training the development process. On a more advanced developmental level, this is going to affect us kind of universally if you think in terms of social psychology. So this social learning, this observation, this interacting with others has a tremendous impact on how we start to develop emotional interactions. Okay? Cognitive theory. Now this is going to talk about thoughts, right? And so with cognitive theory, we're focusing on how you think, take in, and process information. Cognitive theory also talks about early experiences being important because what happens is that our brain is constantly trying to understand the world. And with cognitive theory, this focus is on how our brain does that, how our brain takes in, processes information. And what ends up happening is that through our early experiences, according to cognitive theory, combined with a few other things, our memory, our intelligence, a little bit of genetics, all of these things together help the individual develop what we call a working model of the world. This working model basically then affects everything that we see and everything that we hear and everything that we're exposed to because it creates a belief set or a way of understanding. That belief set or way of understanding is something that we call a schema. It's a framework. And so every piece of information that comes into our head is now run through this schema or this framework, and we process it accordingly. Not directly because of what's happening, right? So I don't process something in the abstract. A silly example, but let's say I'm walking down the street and I trip. And let's say I have this very positive schema. I see everything in my life is good. So I walk down the street and I trip. Well, guess what? If I have this positive schema, I'm going to say, wow, thankfully I didn't break anything. Or, wow, this is going to teach me to pay attention more because I was looking down. I was looking at my phone when I was walking and not looking at the street. So something positive came out of that. I didn't hit my head, right? But if you've developed this sort of negative schema, you can interpret the exact same event in a negative way. So you fall and now my pants are dirty. Now my phone is probably going to be broken and the screen's going to be cracked. Oh, now I skinned my hands. Now I scraped my elbow. Same event, but the way that the brain processes that is different. And cognitive psychology is going to say that that is due to your schema. And your schema comes from early experiences, from how we develop, from the things that we're exposed to, as well as other things like our memory, IQ, genetics, etc. Okay. Epigenetic theory talks about how genetics tend to influence our thought process. And one of the big things that epigenetics theory talks about is something called temperament. Temperament is, it's difficult to describe, but basically temperament is your constitutionally based individual difference. So it's, in essence, your core way of reacting and processing in the world. Now, if you think about it, it's not that much different than your schema, which is what cognitive psychologists discuss. The major difference between schema and temperament is that, according to epigenetic theorists, temperament is biological, and according to cognitive theorists, temperament is something that develops through your early interactions and combinations of other things. That's the main difference, but for the most part, your schema and your temperament are going to be fairly similar. And don't think about temperament as your ability to get angry. Obviously, if you have a particular type of temperament, you're more likely to get angry. But that doesn't mean that when we talk about temperament, we talk about people getting angry. Some people have a very calm temperament where they just don't react to anything. Some people tend to adjust easily to new situations. That's your temperament, according to epigenetic theory. It's not just about getting angry and reacting. Okay. Sociocultural theory talks a lot about how our emotions are going to develop in the greater social context. The world that we live in. Do we live in a world that tends to think of things more positively or negatively? Right? If you think about the 50s, there was a lot of national pride, or the 30s and 40s, right? World War II, there was a lot of national pride. There was a lot of belief in the country as a whole. And so, people's emotions may have been contributed to by that. Probably not the best example. But what if you live in a society that you see as threatening? What if you're in a place where there's a lot of violence? What if you're in a place where it's very dangerous every day to get out of bed? How are your emotions going to develop? Are you going to be suspicious? Are you going to be aggressive? Are you going to be timid or anxious? Well, the idea is that with sociocultural theory, don't forget how the bigger picture of the society as a whole is going to influence your emotions, okay? And influence your behaviors, okay? All right. Now, one of the big things to talk about in this social and emotional developmental chapter is attachment, okay? Basically, your attachment is the bond or the connection that you make with initially your primary caregiver, but it's anybody important in your life. It's that connection, okay? The first attachments that you have form when you're first born, and they typically form towards the primary caregiver, usually a mother, but it could be a father, grandparent, aunt, uncle, whoever it is. But it usually forms towards that primary caregiver, okay? One of the things that's important to understand about attachment theory, and this relates a little bit to cognitive theory, is that the belief is that the attachments that we develop early on really become predictors of the types of attachments we're going to develop later on. So if you have a healthy attachment early on, you'll have healthy attachments later on in your life. If you don't have a healthy attachment early on, you won't have healthy attachment later in life. And it's obviously never that clear, right? You can't guarantee. You can't say this child had an unhealthy attachment when they were a child, so clearly there's no way they're going to have good, healthy attachments when they get older, okay? But there is some relationship there. John Bowbly and Mary Ainsworth did the major attachment research, and Ainsworth did this particular research study on something called the strange situation. Basically, what she did was she had a mother bring her young child, into the room with a stranger and some toys. the mother at a certain point would leave the room with the child still in it and the stranger, and then the mother would return to the room with the child and the stranger. And they watched what the child did, and they noticed that there were 4 patterns of behavior when the child was left by the mother, stayed alone in the room for a minute, and then when the mother came back. Okay? And these patterns they called attachment styles. Okay? The first pattern, which is what we call a secure attachment, basically what would happen is that the child, when they were left by the mother, they would cry, which is normal. They would then, after being left for a little while, play in the room, either with the stranger or the other toys. And then when the mother came back, they were happy. And this is a normal reaction, right? You expect a little bit of separation anxiety, but you expect the child who is healthy and well attached to understand, you know what? Mom walking away is not the end of the world. Mom will come back. She always comes back. This is a safe place. Most of my places are safe, right? So I'm fine. So this is what we would call a secure attachment style. Then there were children who didn't really seem to care. They didn't seem to care when the mom left. They didn't really seem to care about the stranger in the room, and they didn't really seem to care when the mom came back. And they called this an avoidantly attached child. Okay? The child really just didn't seem to care one way or another, and they seemed to have not much of a connection at all. Then there was a pattern of an ambivalent attachment. The ambivalent children were almost like super attached. So with the ambivalent child, they would cry hysterically, get very upset when the mother left the room. They would continue to cry and wouldn't be able to soothe. And then when the mother came back in the room, they were so distressed that they would actually hit the mother, spit at the mother, bite the mother. They were just so livid. And there are different theories and guesses as to why they behave this way. The main guess is that they behaved this way because they just couldn't handle the idea of being separated from their primary caregiver. It was so distressing that they didn't know what to do, and they were overwhelmed because they felt completely abandoned. And this could be because either the mother did abandon them a number of times, had a very inconsistent relationship with the child, or it could be that the mother was so enmeshed, so overly involved with the child, that the child didn't know how to handle it when there was any real separation. The last one was disorganized attachment, and disorganized attachment, it's not really an attachment style. It basically is saying there is no consistent attachment style. It doesn't match any of the above, so you have what we call a disorganized attachment style. And to just anticipate some of the questions that I usually get in an in-person class, does this change? Usually not. Usually whatever attachment style you have or you've developed early on tends to be consistent. Second question that I get is, can you have different attachments with different people? The short answer of that is yes. The long answer of that is yes, but not likely. Typically, especially as we get older, I'm not talking about little children, I'm talking about as adults, you have a greater ability to influence your environment, and you have a greater ability to select in and select out people that you want to have relationships with. And so if you're typically comfortable with a secure attachment style, you're going to contribute to that attachment style with anybody that you're with, and you're going to tend to gravitate towards people that foster that secure attachment, and you'll tend to avoid people that foster more of an ambivalent or avoidant attachment style, okay? Because we go with what we know. It's just common, right? Because this is something we're familiar with, it's comfortable, and that's what we gravitate towards, okay? All right, so that is the end of that slide deck. If you have any questions, as always, email me at david.troy@kbcc.cuny.edu. I'm always around. I'll email you back as soon as I can. Okay? All right. Enjoy.